What's up, everybody? Welcome to Draft Chaff. This is episode number 50. That's right, I said 50. 5-0. We are making it. My name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts, and joining me, as per usual, Ben Fisher. Ben, how's it going?
I mean, this is usually the time when I do some kind of witty intro thing, but let's just skip that this week. We have more important things to talk about. I don't want to make a fool of myself when we have company, you know?
Yeah, that's right. We do have company. Not only is Ben joining me this week, but we also have Rob, aka ViralMisnomer from 17Lands, here to chat about using data to inform decisions. Rob, it's great to have you.
It's great to be here. I'm excited to chat through this with you guys.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of that, of course, we have some housekeeping items. If you haven't been made aware yet, check out the Discord. That's the best place to go to talk with us outside of the show, and we've got channels open for just about everything from the new limited sets. I know Modern Horizons 2 just came out. It's going to be an interesting limited format, as well as a nice addition to a lot of constructed formats. We've got stuff for all of the main limited formats going on, as well as a handful of constructed formats over there at the Discord, so check that out. And we're coming up, as I mentioned, this is episode number 50. We're coming up very quickly to our 1-year anniversary, and we're going to have a lot of stuff going on for that, so you definitely don't want to miss that. The best place to be to check out all of the news on that is the Discord. You can check out the link to that in the episode description, and we'll see you there. Of course, if you are interested in supporting the show, the best place to do that is Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/draftchaffpod. Of course, the show's always free, but we do have a couple of different options over there for you if you're interested in supporting us directly. We've got things like stickers, access to the full show notes, custom deck building opportunities with Ben and I, access to unedited versions of the show, and things of that nature. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check that out. And as a result of the awesome patrons over there at Patreon, we are now uploading all of our videos, or all of our episodes, to YouTube, so definitely check that out if you want like a video version of the podcast as well. All right. With that out of the way, on to our crack a draft type thing. Ben, you've got a pack 1 pick 3 for us. Why don't you walk us through it?
Right. So for those that are new, this is where we take a look at either a pack 1 pick 1 or just a pick from a draft. Something that Zach and I encountered in the past week that made us scratch our heads a little bit, something worth discussing. And oh boy, I prefaced this one to Zach by saying, so I had this train wreck draft last week, and it wound up very strange. So I wanted to kind of break down what went wrong. The deck finished 2 and 3. It was a mess, and I heavily attribute that to my messy draft. So I first picked Rip Apart. Solid, good stuff. There wasn't anything particularly interesting in the pack that was worthy of note. I don't love first picking a 2-colored card, of course, but it was just by power level the strongest pick in the pack. I felt pretty okay with it. Second, I was happy to see a heated debate in the next pack. I snapped that up, and I'm looking to be some kind of either red-white aggro or potentially one of these, like Jeskai control-y decks that could potentially make use of Rip Apart in later game. Pack 3 is where the wheels fell off the metaphorical train. Wait, trains have wheels, right? Or yeah, they have the kind of like but you know what I mean. They have like the weird things on the side. Okay, wheels on the bus. That's the saying, right? So in this pack here, we've got Devouring Tendrils, Dina Soul Steeper. There's some nonsense in there, some things, Crushing Disappointment, Eureka Moment, some of those things that we wouldn't discuss. But what otherwise sticks out to me from the commons is Quandrix Pledge Mage, Rise of Exodus, and we still have a lesson in this pack that's Spirit Summoning. There's a Hunt for Specimens hiding here too, as the only learned card in the pack besides First Day of Class, which is playable, but I don't love it. I took the Devouring Tendrils here. Let's talk about why this probably wasn't a good idea.
Well, we do have the added benefit of the 17Lands log, so I was able to see how the rest of this draft went, and this was actually a pivotal pick here for Ben. I personally, one card you left out in your description of the pack there was the Prismari Pledge Mage, and that's actually the pick I would have gone with here. You've got Heated Debate, you've got Rip Apart. None of these other cards really jive too well with either of those cards, and I could see potentially taking the Devouring Tendrils as maybe a signal that green is open with the Dina and the Pledge Mage also in the pack, but in my opinion, coming into pack 1 pick 3, it's just too early to make stake a claim on a basically a third color sort of without seeing more context for the draft. And there are 3 powerful green cards in this pack. That doesn't necessarily tell me that green's open. They may just have not been the best cards in the pack. We only have 2 picks missing. So I would have taken the Prismari Pledge Mage. It keeps you open in red, and you can wait to take that second color. You're probably going to end up splashing the Rip Apart.
Any thoughts on this, Rob?
Yeah, I agree that this is a tough pick. There are a lot of options here. I think as Zach was saying, there are a few sort of multicolored cards here, or sorry, hybrid cards here that I think would be drawing my eye. Probably the Prismari Pledge Mage, but I think Rise of Exodus is also something you could consider just for the flexibility in that you don't, like you said, you don't want to dip your toe into necessarily a third color and know that you're not almost or pretty unlikely to play the Devouring Tendrils with the Heated Debate unless you're splashing, which I don't think you want to be doing as much. So yeah, I would probably agree with Zach on the Prismari Pledge Mage here.
Mm-hmm. I think Rise of Exodus, just as a solid learn card, good stuff. But right now, just based on our first two picks, we don't really know what kind of deck this is going to be. Whether this is going to be like a low to the ground aggressive deck, both of which kind of slot into, or whether it's going to be a later game controlling deck, both which, I mean, these are just two good valuable removal spells, right? So I agree. Admittedly, what was going through my head here was that this is a power level signal to me. So what I think I was thinking about was this has told me that the people to my right weren't super interested in a good rate green removal spell. And I think this was a bad use of kind of like expected value reasoning. I was thinking that, well, maybe green is going to end up being open and then I'm okay taking a pick here on Devouring Tendrils. But it is pick 3. I don't think I should have been speculating that early. It's a little soon for that. However, sometime before this format ends, I do want to draft the fabled red-green deck, which I just don't think works, and I have actually seen the 17Lands data, and it confirms that it has an awful win rate compared to everything else. So someday I want to try it, but this was not that time.
I haven't looked. How many people do we have that have tried that out on 17Lands?
Not too many brave souls, but it didn't look like many were successful.
All right. With that, let's move on to our Teferi Tybalt. If you're new to the show, this is a section where we talk about something good that happened in our week, something bad that happened in our week. You might have heard of this as Roses and Thorns. Ben, why don't you kick us off with this one?
Yeah, sure. So my Teferi, or my rose, so to speak, I had a 4-day weekend. It was Memorial Day here in the United States, and I actually had a leftover snow day. For those that don't know, I'm a teacher. We had a snow day that we never used, and they just kind of stuck it on to Memorial Day weekend. I don't really know why or what the logic was behind that. I would have preferred to have a day cut off from the end of the school year, but I don't make the rules. That also meant that I have a short week this week, 3 days, which is pretty nice. That being said, a lot of my classes have 100% checked out. They are no longer interested in doing anything. I had my seniors hooked today for the first 20 minutes because we watched a clip from Mad Max and we're analyzing the trajectories of like the stunt bike riders and trying to figure out at what exact time they'd have to drop grenades on the rigs and everything. It was really cool. And then we started doing the actual physics and like they fell asleep at home because, you know, it's tough. But anyway, it's still a fun time having a bit of a short week. My Tybalt this week. Oh man, it was a saga. So I had one of the worst, most scarring encounters with a bug I've ever had in my life. And I consider myself a pretty naturey guy. I like bugs. But this house centipede, some people know them as silverfish. They're these things that crawl around in your house. They look horrifying. There was a card that looks kind of like it recently. What was the 3-mana 3/1 that got landfall +2/+2 from Zendikar Rising?
Oh, geez. You're taking me back 3 sets now. I don't know.
Tunneling Geopede?
It's a Geopede, right? It was some kind of... They basically looked like that. And the one that I had in my house was that big. So this thing, I managed to like... It fell into my sink as I was brushing my teeth, like from the sky. And it made like a plunk as it hit the sink. It was horrific. I managed to like flush it down the drain just by throwing water on it. And then it crawls back out. Like it thinks it's some kind of Terminator or something. It was horrific. one of the worst experiences of my life, hands down. Would not do again. And I usually like bugs, so this was rough for me.
I guess your house spider's not doing its job. Didn't last week? I think your fairy tibble involved a massive spider in your house.
Well, my theory is that the bugs in my house are unionizing, and
Oh.
that they've decided to rise up against me because I've always treated them with respect. But I guess I must have swatted at a fly, and the union didn't like that. So respect on the bugs for teaming up, but I can't wait to switch apartments. That's all I'll say. Anyway, what's up with you this week, Zach?
Yeah, so my Teferi was that given that it was Memorial Day this weekend in the U.S., as Ben mentioned, I had a pretty sweet vacation. My wife and I went up to New Hampshire to visit her sister, and then basically all of like the Northeast, like New England area, is covered in really awesome mountains. So we did a ton of hiking. Went out there to do some landscape photography and stuff. It was really, really fun. I'm like, I guess I'm an amateur hobbyist photographer, so I enjoy doing that sort of thing. Got some really cool photos of the White Mountain National Forest. We had this one hike that was like 3-ish miles, and it was a mile of, there was 1,000-foot elevation gain in 1 mile, and then it was like a plateau for a mile, and then back down that 1,000 feet for the last mile. Wow. So it was a pretty fun hike, a little bit rigorous, but not like backbreaking or anything. So it was really nice. And at the top of the mountain that we were on was this massive lake that they call Lonesome Lake. So it's just like in this like caldera in the top of a mountain. It was really, really nice, a nice view. My tibble this week, though, is that we got up. So that whole weekend was supposed to rain. It was supposed to rain like Saturday, Sunday, and then late Friday evening. And our plan was to come back home Monday morning. So we got up there on Friday, and because it was supposed to rain Friday evening, we thought, let's get in early. We'll do one hike Friday afternoon, and then at least if it rains the rest of the weekend, we got one hike in. So we get to this mountain. We're going to this place called Artist Bluff in New Hampshire. It's another beautiful view of a lake overlooked by this big rocky bluff on the side of a mountain. And we get out, and I realize I left all the SD cards for my camera at home. So my camera's just useless, which was really disheartening because like 90% of the trip was to take photos, and kind of hard to do that without a camera that works. I ended up getting some decent shots on my phone anyway, but it just felt bad. And then as I was like packing up my camera stuff to leave in the car, I realized I also left my hiking shoes at Hannah's parents' house because we stopped there on the way up. So it was just like a nightmare all around. I just forgot all the important stuff. But the trip ended up being okay. And then the next day it wasn't raining, so we got to do another hike, and I managed to run out and get an SD card. So I salvaged the rest of that trip. But yeah, I was not happy when I first checked that out.
Nice. Well, for our visual watchers, I can show off some of Zach's photography. It's quite good. There you go. Check that out.
Wow, that was
gorgeous, right?
But thanks. Yeah. That was...
yeah, I love this picture. It's gorgeous. Is this the caldera, right?
Yep. That was that one.
Very nice.
It's good that phones these days are decent alternatives compared to flip phones or nothing. You go back far enough. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things, at least for landscape photography, is having a wide-angle lens. And a lot of phones nowadays do have those added. So yeah, for sure, they've come a long way. But how about you, Rob? How was your week this week?
It's been pretty good. For me, for the Teferi, I think the thing that was best for me was being able to launch a new feature on the site. So we haven't made it super public yet, just released it within the Discord. But for doing drafts on the site against a model that's been trained against all the draft data that we have from our users. So a chance for people to run through practice drafts without burning through gems, which is exciting. And so it's been good to see people's reactions to that, see what feedback people have, the impact it has on the site itself to make sure it's not going to bring everything down or use too many resources. So yeah, that was one of our Patreon goals. So it was good to hit that a little while back, and then been working on it as much as I can to get that out since then.
Yeah, that's awesome. It was really cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, really, just a really cool feature. I was really excited to see that was released in the Discord there. Very, very cool.
And it'll be interesting to see it. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves as we add more sets and things like that. A lot of cool stuff to come on that. On the other end of the spectrum, for my Tybalt, we had a bit of rain here this past weekend, and my wife and I moved into a new house about a year ago that we knew was quite a fixer-upper. But this weekend we found out that the roof definitely needs to be replaced ASAP. Had some water leaking in, not too much, and thankfully the rain held off. But never good to hear something dripping inside your house, especially not in a sink or anything like that.
Yikes. Definitely not.
Yeah, that's less than ideal for sure.
That resolved pretty quickly. I mean, just seeing the hard work you all do on 17Lands, I hope you have that same skill with house repairs.
Learning YouTube helps a lot.
That's true. YouTube actually, it's kind of wild how much you can pick up and just do randomly based on YouTube videos. It's kind of surprising. Like working on cars and all sorts of stuff is kind of made a lot more accessible by YouTube. All right, with that, on to our listener question of the week. This one comes from Rob Dies at the End, and actually we kind of have 3 questions from Rob Dies at the End this week. They addressed the question to Ben and myself, and then we're adding a little tidbit here because the listeners didn't know we were having Rob on this week, so we're going to add one in there for him. But Ben, yours is up first. What has surprised you the most about your first year of teaching?
This is tough. It's really difficult to say because this wasn't a normal year for many reasons. I've been teaching hybrid, so I almost feel like I can't speak to anything other than that experience. I'll probably have a different answer by the end of my first year in-person teaching, But I would say, as for this year, my students have surprised me the most, and just what they can do. I think it was my graduate advisor that always told us to never underestimate our students and to never assume that they can't do a certain thing, because they will always surprise you. And I've just had that confirmed over and over again. Every time I feel myself slipping or almost phoning it in a little bit, one of my students will just do something incredible, and I'm like, oh my god, I have to keep going. So it's been rewarding in a way because it helps propel me to the next big thing. So hearing students hearing that click, that has been, I mean, there's nothing like it in the world. It's really rewarding. So actually tomorrow I'm doing a really fun observational experiment that the students are going to watch. I'm taking my whole class outside for my astronomy class, and we're going to do a general relativity experiment. It's going to be very cool. It involves dropping a water bottle, and some surprising things happen. You can look it up on YouTube. I think, I forget who has a good video, but if you just look up general relativity water bottle, there's some really cool experiments on there. Highly recommend looking it up if you were interested in physics or anything tangential. So I would say my students have surprised me the most. Part 2 of this question is for Zach. What has surprised you the most about your first few months of your new job? And also maybe for people, what is that job?
Yeah, so I'm in the DevSecOps space, meaning I work with software infrastructure for a living. And the new job that I am in now, I used to be a site reliability engineer for Nielsen. They do data analytics and collection of data for all sorts of different things in media. In fact, your targeted ads that you get on Instagram and Facebook and stuff likely came from data they collected. But I moved to a different company called Boxboat. They are a DevSecOps consultancy, so I work now with clients, basically learn what needs that client has, and then do my best to either give them suggestions on how to fix it or fix it myself for them. And I'd say the most surprising part about that has been just how different other companies' problems are, and how easy it is to work in a group that doesn't actually have its own product. It's different. It's interesting because at Nielsen I was working as kind of a support member for a certain software product that the company had. And so I was in charge of making sure that the infrastructure was always available. And if something broke or a computer, shut down or something, a server went down, I had to be there to fix it and things like that. So I was on call at times. So it's sort of like a live service aspect. And Boxbow doesn't have any products because we're a consultancy. So I don't have any of that. I can just work on the project I'm working on, and then I roll off of that into a new project working with a different client, and that part has been really, really fun. But it's just interesting, the difference in workflow from a company that doesn't actually have its own product compared to one that does, and seeing, and I've been on 2 engagements so far. I've worked with 2 different clients, and the problems they asked me to solve were tangential. They worked with the same technologies, but they were very different problems, and it's cool to see just how different things are in different environments and different ecosystems within different companies. So I'd say that's probably the most surprising to me.
Yeah, whenever you talk about what you do for work, in like spy movies when they have the hacker character and they're just like mashing on the keyboard and like green text floods the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I picture you doing.
It's not at all like that, but okay.
That's what I see. So I'm pretty sure that's right.
If you want that experience, go to hackertyper.com and you'll get exactly that. It's lovely.
Yeah. I picture you just on HackerTyper all day.
Yeah, not so much, but that's fun to think about, I guess. I kind of wish I was there just like mashing keys all day.
Have you ever had to hack a mainframe in your work experience?
I have never touched a mainframe. No, I used to work at IBM, and they're like a big mainframe company, or at least they used to be, but I have never actually had hands on a mainframe before.
Does the M in IBM stand for mainframe?
It does not. It stands for machines.
It's worth a shot. Anyway.
All right. The third part of this question, which we're sort of injecting into this for Rob here, is what is the most surprising thing that you've experienced running 17Lands?
I mean, the obvious thing that jumps to mind for me is just how it's taken off. The fact that we have thousands of people using the software every day, people who click through the advice against Windows of don't install this virus on your computer to just be able to access their data and contribute to the data for the community, and just the number of people in our Discord, people who are passionate about the data, willing to help out other people who want to use the tracker, use the software, teach people data science skills. I never would have imagined 2 years ago that this would be where things are. So yeah, there's been a lot to learn along the way, along with all that growth, which has been good.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm kind of sorry you have to see some of my drafts. I assume every single draft that gets sent to you like kind of check mark and approve, and it goes past you. So I apologize for that.
That's exactly true.
That's a pretty good segue into our main topic today, isn't it?
Yeah. So as you know already, we have Rob, aka ViralMisnomer, here from 17Lands, and the goal of this episode is to walk through using data to inform decisions properly. We've seen a lot of stuff on the interwebs and the Twitterverse and all of that since 17Lands has picked up so much, of people not necessarily using the data to the best of their ability or to the best application that it can be used at. And we wanted to kind of, Ben and I both have a small statistics background, but we wanted to try to walk through proper data usage and a lot of the different things that go into actually applying the data you see on a site like 17Lands to your drafts and limited, and then also just kind of life in general. There are a lot of different ways you can apply data even in your daily life. So we thought there was no better person to have on the show besides the one who runs 17Lands in the first place. So of course we wanted to get Rob. Thanks again so much for coming on. We're really, really excited to have you. But for the listener, why don't you just give us a quick breakdown? Like who are you? A little bit of background on who you are, maybe what you did before 17Lands, what brought you to create 17Lands, things of that nature. Just a quick little intro.
Yeah, I guess sort of by trade, I'm a software developer. My background is in mostly in data engineering. So I'm more there definitely are better people that you could bring on to talk about how to use the data. My background is more in how to manage the data, but definitely have experience with how to use this data properly and have a intimate understanding of what all the caveats are and things like that. But yeah, I enjoy writing software. Been playing Magic for a while now. Started, I feel like same story as a lot of people. Played when I was a kid, took a decade off, and then jumped back into it a little bit after college with some roommates, and fell in love with Limited, and just really wanted to. When I saw that Arena had this sort of data available, really wanted to be able to see what we could do with it, and so started 17Lands in the Lords of Limited Discord. Got a few people to give some feedback on the initial version of the software. Just at that time, it was simple of people maybe, so nothing significant in terms of sample sizes, but people were enjoying the draft replay functionality and just being able to keep track of their statistics, and slowly built up from there. So yeah, it's been a good ride since then.
Yeah, that's awesome. So just to be clear to listener, 17Lands is like your pet project almost.
Yeah. I work on it in the evenings and on the weekends. I have a full-time job outside of it. So at this point, I'm not alone. I guess kind of throughout, my wife helped me build the first version of the site. She's got more. I don't have all that much web development experience outside of 17Lands, but she has more, and so she helped me get the first version of the site up. And we've had a few other people contribute. One of my coworkers has helped out with it. We've had a few other people. There's I think one of the people in your Discord, Hululu, has done a lot of work. He built out the game replay functionality, which has been a huge thing for the site. A lot of people love that. And then obviously we've had people like Tyrkovitz helping out on the data analysis side of things, being a great advocate for the data and for what we're doing. So it's none of us are working on it full time. Everyone's just kind of doing it out of interest and passion, and doing it when time permits.
That's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. This is, to our knowledge, the only time something like this has ever happened in Magic. I don't think anyone's ever tried anything like this. I don't know if MTGO has any kind of data community behind it, but at least this is the most traction anything like this has ever gotten.
Yeah, I know there have been things in the past where people have aggregated certain statistics. I think it was MTG Goldfish a while back would take results from Magic Online, and also potentially from Grand Prix and stuff, trying to formulate or figure out what the constructed metagame was at any given point in time, and how those decks were not only doing against each other, but you don't have the same granularity of data that we get from the arena logs. So just nothing like this was ever really possible until now.
Yeah, awesome. So before we get into some of the nitty gritty, so to speak, we wanted to get to know you a little bit more. So I want you to think way back. What is the earliest Magic the Gathering experience you remember? Some kind of kitchen table play, or you said you started when you were a kid, yeah?
Yeah, I was probably in middle school at the time. A friend of a friend had a bunch of cards, and I think he just brought them over one day, and we started playing with them. Knew nothing about the rules other than the very basics that you needed, and I'm sure made up a whole bunch of stuff on the fly. And we spread it to a few other friends that we had, and had maybe half a dozen people who would play in giant multiplayer games with terrible decks and terrible mana bases, and just the biggest creatures you could find, shove them in there because numbers are good. But that's the original Magic for me.
That's
If
awesome.
it costs a lot of mana and it's got a high power, high toughness, it's got to be good.
Yeah. Sometimes I miss the days before I knew how the stack worked. Those were simpler times.
All right. So, kind of staying in that time period or that era of your career with Magic, or even now, tastes change. We're curious, what was your favorite Magic card?
It was so it was around the time of Prophecy, I think. Prophecy, Invasion, that I played as a kid, and sticking with the theme of big creatures. Is it Avatar of Might? It was some green rare that was like, I think it was like for 10 mana for like a 10/10 trample or something that cost less if your opponents had more creatures than you. So a potentially cheap way to get out of a big creature. It had trample too, I think. That was the one for me. I feel like I should look this up and give the people more accurate details. Buddy Scryfall.
I got it up. Yeah, we got 6 green for an 8/8 Avatar. If an opponent controls at least 4 more creatures than you, Avatar of Might costs 6 less to play. Trample. Yeah,
wow, 2
solid.
8/8.
I got the general details right, but none of the specifics. I would be terrible at the what's the game they play on LR of guessing the cards by the name?
Oh, Stump Louise.
Yeah, that's Stump, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more the vibe that matters in the end.
Big beefy green creature.
Of course. So, kind of on the similar route, how would you describe your Magic play style in a single word?
A single word.
Yeah.
I guess assertive, maybe. I feel like I generally want to make my opponent have it, and will. My general tendency is to play towards shorter games. And so, I find myself trying to get on board and play quickly.
Bit of an aggro fan then?
Yeah, either aggro or more tempo. I feel like often the deck that suits me the best is like a blue-red tempo deck, blue-red spells that get on the board, that get them dead before they've been able to use all the cards, or if I've bounced a few cards to their hand, make them pay for that.
I love it. Yeah, that's right up my alley as well. Ben, not so much, but that's right up my alley.
We all have different tastes. Some tastes are correct and some are incorrect.
Well, some are correct and some are yours. So
okay, walk into that one, I guess.
All right. Our next question here is the one that is at the forefront of all of our listeners' minds. It's the one that is burning holes in everybody's heads when we have guests on. If you were a potato, how would you want to be prepared and served?
Yeah, so I tried not to think too much about these questions beforehand, but this one I don't think I could answer on the fly. So my answer here is that I would want to be baked potato, so I could be put to a nice sleep before having someone dive into me with a knife.
That is certainly a good way to go, I suppose. And baked potatoes also have the added benefit of being able to kind of throw whatever you want onto it. Like a loaded baked potato is great, and they're very customizable. So I think that's a great choice.
So to kind of bridge our way back to Magic here, if you could make any changes to Strixhaven as a format, what would it be and why?
That's a good question. I think for the most part, they did a pretty good job with this set. I think what I sort of gravitate towards here is the Mystical Archive cards. I actually love them and the sort of variety that they add. And so I would actually lean into that a little bit harder. And I don't know if I would add get a larger card pool so that there's more diversity in what you get there, or add a second Mystical Archive card in each pack or something. But I think the variety that it adds is pretty good, so I would lean into that a little bit more.
Cool. I agree. I sometimes feel like I see the uncommon ones just a little too often. I think that pool could be expanded a little bit. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if they did this again. I don't know if I want this every set, but it was pretty cool.
These are, I think, a much better version of, was it the invocations that they had in Amonkhet, or the expeditions, I guess, in one of those Zendikar sets a while back. Having them in every pack is nice.
Yeah, I think it was last episode we were talking about this a little bit more. Ben and I were going back and forth about how we would like to see this used in the future, and I know like the Mystical Archive flavor to it fit Strixhaven very well, but I would absolutely love to see this style of thing going forward in most sets. It's a nice way to get reprints for cards that typically don't have them without having to dedicate an entire set to reprinting those. And then, as you say, it's definitely nicer to see them in every pack and feel like you're getting rewarded just for opening a pack than like the invocations and the expeditions were, because they were just too hard to get access to. I think it didn't feel great.
Yeah, and when they offer sort of a once in a set build around opportunity, like playing a storm deck with devouring tendrils, or tendrils of agony, sorry, or something like that, is a fun opportunity.
Yeah, and it actually seemed like they curated this set of Mystical Archives well to fit with the format quite a bit, because we have the Storm cards, there's the Prismari decks that care a lot about Storm, and Magecraft is throughout the whole, like all the colors, so there is a very, very much a Spells Matter sub-theme through the set, so those cards felt right at home. They didn't feel like they were just shoved in there. And then you had cards like Approach from the Second Sun, which is like a big beefy spell, and copying spells is a thing. I know that interaction doesn't exactly work with that card, but it felt like they curated it well, and I would love to see them continue to do that.
For sure.
All right, I think we should get into our main topic now. We have Mr. 17Lands, so to speak. So we wanted to kind of chat about 17Lands and how to use some of the features on the site a little more effectively. So for those that I guess have been very confused listening to this podcast so far, 17Lands is a website, and it is Magic limited data focused. So we are huge advocates of it here on the show. We use it all the time. We've recommended it to many people, and some of the bigger features of the site that we've chatted about before are the ability to see draft logs, and kind of like share a draft with other people. It's what we often use for a Crack-a-Draft type thing, even, as well as kind of see some of the card ratings and win rates and other certain things. That is what we're going to delve into more today. So we've kind of realized that the future of Magic Limited is data driven. I think this has become a bigger idea recently. I remember seeing one time on Magic Twitter, there were some pros arguing about whether or not, like, I think it was Cram Session was a pick in a certain pack, and then someone just like posted the 17Lands data, and they're like, no, look, I'm right. And I remember seeing that, like, whoa, this is a pretty significant turning point in Magic's evolution. So how did this take off? What kind of propelled this from just being, I guess, your pet project to now this thing that I'd say the average limited player knows about?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, having been involved with it for 2 years, I don't know that I can pinpoint a time when I would say that it took off necessarily. Like, there's oftentimes the way the growth has looked has been kind of slow, steady growth. I think at first we were adding maybe one or two or a couple of people a week using it, and then one thing would happen. I would publish an analysis where I think the first podcast with a mention was the Lords of Limited podcast, when back when bot drafts were the only thing you could do on Arena. They mentioned it, and a number of their users started using it. So we got a big jump then, and also a little bump in the growth rate. And then we would sort of add more users, get another analysis. Sirkovitz got involved at some point and started posting some of his analyses, which have just continued to go on and continue to get better and better over time. And that just sort of kind of slowly adds more users. And then I think probably the biggest step function in our users was starting to be talked about on limited resources. Obviously, the biggest podcast in the limited space, so has the most reach, and getting endorsement from them of doing something valuable, I think has brought a lot more users in, a lot more legitimacy. But like without any of those previous steps, the next step wouldn't have been able to happen. So it's been more gradual growth over time, I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's not very surprising to me, at least, that this is something that eventually caught on. I know you're saying it's not really like an overnight sort of thing. And I know as a consumer of content and like being someone who just uses 17Lands and doesn't actually work on it, it kind of seemed to me like it happened overnight, but I know how that can definitely be misleading. But it's not surprising to me at all that it took off, because it's basically what limited players have wanted for a while, given that we had a lot of data aggregation in the constructed space for a long time. We had tournament results for a very long time. We've had like aggregating results of different archetypes for quite a while, and that just hasn't happened in limited because of the different nuances that are involved. So it's really cool that not only were you able to do this, but obviously off the back of Arena actually exporting logs that are usable and parsable and things like that. And so that's kind of the main feature that we obviously look at with 17Lands, like that raw data that we can just go look at. You do have a number of different, as you said, a number of different analyses and different articles being posted on the site now as well, but all that data is just there for us to go look at, which is awesome. We really like that it allows people to interpret it as they need it. If they aren't really interested in a particular subset of the data, they don't have to really pay any attention to it. They can just look at what they care about, and that's also really awesome. But as we said, there's a lot of kind of incorrect ideas or not fully formed ideas about how to use that data. So we wanted to cover first a few fundamentals about data analysis and data usage. And I'll just jump into it. One of the first things that I think people are introduced to when it comes to data analysis or data usage is sample size. It's something that's talked about all the time, and it's generally very important, but not always explained why it's important. So can you just explain a little bit, what are sample sizes, why are they so important, and why do we hear about it so much in data analysis talk?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest thing with sample sizes is that, for anything that we're looking at, that we're observing, there's some amount of randomness in it. So if I take my deck and go 7-0 with it in Mythic, it's not necessarily that is the best deck ever. There's Magic is a game with random chance, and so I may have just drawn well. My opponents may have gotten flooded. Any individual data point is not totally representative, and so. But as you add more and more and more data over time, if you're looking at things that are similar and have multiple observations of them, you can sort of hone in on what the actual likelihood of winning for a given deck or card or whatever it is that you're looking at might be. And so the higher the sample sizes that you get, the more confident you can be in the result that you're looking at. And so just some if we're looking at win percentage or something, just some rough numbers to keep in mind. If you're looking at something that has about 1,000 data points associated with it, and you see that it's a 50% win rate, you can expect that as you get more and more samples, that's going to be roughly within 3 percentage points of where you're going to end up long term. So if I to put that as a concrete example, if I have red on 17Lands and we have 1,000 games played with it, and the win rate is 55%, I would guess that by the time we get to 100,000 games played with that color pair, that it's going to be somewhere between 52 and 58%. But definitely not guaranteed that that's going to be the case, but that's sort of the most likely outcome. But I would not be surprised if started out at 55% and then moved down to 53% and then jumped up to 57%.
Awesome.
Anything you guys want to add there on sample sizes?
Well, when Zach mentioned earlier that we both have a statistics background, I hope he wasn't referring to the fact that we took AP stats together in high school, because I wouldn't call myself much more of an expert on that. But yeah, it's interesting to just note in kind of big picture terms that when we look at any single like percentage, we maybe should be taking it slightly less literally than this is like the hard percentage of this thing. Like you mentioned, the more and more data that we have, it tends towards, I guess, what you'd call the real answer. But I guess that's just more of a reason to get everybody on 17Lands, right?
Absolutely. The more people we get, the closer we can get to the real number, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is important to keep in mind as well. Like, it's, as you mentioned there, Rob, like, it's not surprising to see a certain archetype at a certain percentage and then come back in a few weeks and see that, you know, it's got an extra 25% samples and now that percentage is different, because we are essentially trending toward a more specific answer. But yeah, we're never really going to get that 100% perfect value that is perfectly representative of the data we're looking at. So with that in mind, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. So I was also going to add that like target that we're trying to get to is it's probably going to change over time as people understand how to play with the cards, as people as the like overall balance of the metagame shifts. If people are playing a lot of lore hold at the beginning of the set, and then a couple weeks later, instead of having 2 lore hold drafters per draft, you're down to 1. Like that target win percent is gonna shift. So it's tough when you have a moving thing that you're trying to track, along with having to deal with the variance of any individual match.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think a lot of newer limited players don't necessarily think about that aspect of limited, but there is, you know, at least when I first started playing limited and I heard about a limited metagame, my thought was deck A versus deck B and how the two of those match up against each other versus all the other decks in the format. But there's actually like a different metagame that's taking place while you're at the draft table, right? Where you and drafter 7, let's say, of the 8-person draft table are both drafting the same color pair. And now you have competing individuals working to build the best version of that deck as they can, and you're obviously taking resources from each other. So there's a bit of a metagame there to understand, like, based on the cards that I'm seeing, you never want to sit down at the draft table and force a specific deck right out of the gate, but based on the cards that I'm seeing, who else is drafting these decks and which should I move into? And that adapts and changes as the format gets more quote-unquote solved. So yeah, those numbers definitely do change. So kind of along the lines of that, along with that, we've talked about sample sizes. We talked a little bit about understanding what data is available and when to use it, where to use it. But what do I actually need to keep in mind? What do I need to know when I'm trying to take these data points that I see on a site like 17Lands and apply them to my decision making? Things like perhaps, you know, the population of the sample, different assumptions that you need to make when you're actually trying to make results out of the data that you find. Like, what are things you need to keep in mind when you're actually trying to apply this data to decision making?
For sure. So this is one of the things that I tried to think about a little bit before hopping on the show, and outline some points here and realize I basically outlined the scientific method. So the way that I have it outlined here is, first you want to ask a question. So maybe your question is like, what's the best card to, or what's the best card in Strixhaven? And then really I think you want to get a little more specific on there. So dive deeper into what it is that you're really trying to ask. Like maybe instead of what's the best card, maybe you're trying to ask what card that I pack one, pick one will lead to the most wins. So get specific about what you're trying to learn from the data. Then go out there and look at what data is actually available. So I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but if you're using 17Lands, there are various win rate statistics that we can look at. Or maybe you're not actually interested in performance, maybe you're interested in how people are evaluating the cards, and you want to take a sample of all the tier lists that people have and look at the card that's highest rated among all of them. Just sort of understand what you can use to answer your question. And then from there, I think it's good to actually understand what the data actually means. So what are the caveats that go into there? If we're looking at game in hand win rate on 17Lands, does that mean that card counts one per game? Or if it's a card like Rutha that can end up in your hand multiple times per game, does that oversample it? Or how do lessons play into that? Understand actually how the data is formulated so you can know how to relate it to your question. Then another important step is to form a hypothesis. So before you've actually looked at the data, looked at the sources that you think might yield an answer, take a guess, take a stab. Maybe it's mascot exhibition, or maybe it's one of some other mythic in the set or something. And this is important because it can help you identify sort of misinterpreted the data when you look at the results, or it can sort of drive a lot more learning when you understand maybe why you were wrong and what your guess was. And then once you have that hypothesis, then actually jump in and dive in and look at the data, see how that compares to your hypothesis, and think about the results and what that actually means and what you learned from it. So a lot of process goes into trying to use the data properly. Obviously, you're not going to do that for every decision you're trying to make, or every argument that you're trying to make. Just judging by the sheer number of posts I've seen on Twitter or Reddit or wherever, where people are just pulling out a number and they use the same number every time. Not going through all of that, but I think it's important to really understand what argument you're trying to make with the data.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I actually really like the way you laid that out, because it does pretty nicely mimic the scientific method, and I don't think that's accidental, really. Right? There's a reason that general science, and Ben, you can talk a lot more to this than I can, given your background, but there's a reason that the scientific method is set up that way, and I think most of the scientific studies that are done are really about data in and of themselves as well. So it doesn't surprise me that these two kind of mirror each other so closely.
Yeah, Zach alluded to this, but my background is in astrophysics, and I think that this is perfectly mirroring the scientific development of ideas in physics, and other sciences too. In fact, Zach, we got to jot this down. Let's have a show sometime about how we can apply the scientific method to learning about limited. There's a bunch of physicists that listen to this show, so I think that'll be a fun thing to do down the line. Sure. But anyway, yeah. Now, kind of along the lines of some of these incorrect ideas that we often see floating around, let's just rattle off a few real quick. First of all, does win rate equate to pick order? For example, if I see two cards and one has a higher overall win rate, I should just always take that, right?
No. Next question. No, I mean, like I said, you can take that piece of information to sort of inform what you're doing, but especially in Magic in the drafting portion, once you're more than maybe two picks in, there's probably I could actually probably go in and look at this, but no two drafts are ever going to be the same. So by the time you've seen 2-3 packs of cards, have made a couple of picks, you're in a completely novel situation. And so you don't actually know what the win rate of card A versus card B is in that exact situation. As much as I would like to get every player on Arena using 17 lands, even still, we would never get enough data to be able to answer those sorts of questions. So there's going to be all sorts of caveats that come in, whether it's the color pair that you're in, the synergies between your cards. Like as much as we should all strive to not necessarily have a particular play style, like that's going to factor in as well. And so, no, you should not be blindly using win rate to decide which card to pick.
Yeah, it's actually it's funny the way you phrase that. We've been talking about this idea that's kind of Ben's brainchild that he calls vector theory, which is just an idea that he came up with to discuss how to best build a deck and construct it in terms of the actual draft portion of Limited, and that kind of ties into that as well. Like the overall look and the picture of what your deck is at any given pick is going to more heavily, or should more heavily, influence the next pick you're making over just a single data point like win rate or win rate in hand or anything like that. Because especially in Magic, like the data's so complex and the decision making points are so complex that there are just way too many factors that are in play to limit it down to one specific thing.
That being said, I would be lying if I say I haven't tried a draft or two where I solely base it on the win rate just to see how it goes. But I would not recommend doing that as a long-term strategy.
I'll have to fire up the 17Lands draft sim and give it a go in that, so I don't have to
test in a
waste
safe
the gem.
environment.
Yeah, then you're not wasting gems.
Yeah.
Actually, side question, because that just came back up, and because I am a software nerd, I'm just curious from a model perspective, are you training the model off of the sims as well, or just on data that's collected from Arena?
Currently, just off of the data that's collected from Arena. I think if we look towards, say, when the next set comes out, and we want to build something for that, obviously we're not going to have something from day one, so we may need to turn it off some of that data. But I generally would like to lean towards things where there's at least some amount of stakes on the line, so that you don't have people who are just kind of randomly picking through, polluting the data.
Yeah, that's where my head was going as well. I was just curious how you guys were handling it. That's cool. Okay, so
and it also, sorry, I was going to say, and it also allows us to sort of look at how the deck did overall, or how the user that did it, what their overall performance is, what their win rate is, or what their rank is, so that we can, if we're trying to build better bots, and better is like what better means is like I think that's trying to draft the best deck, or is that more closely mimic human behavior, or what? But if we're trying to mimic something that builds a better deck, then you want to be able to incorporate that win rate data as well.
Sure.
So I have a side offshoot question. Do you have a plan in place for when the 17Lands site gets too smart and starts to take over more things than just the Magic Twitter?
I do not. I do not have a big red button to hit to turn everything off. Maybe that should be my next project.
God help us all. Anyway, what's our next question, Zach?
Yeah, so next, kind of along with the win rate equating to pick order, does a specific color pair having the highest win rate mean I should force that color pair?
What's your goal? If your goal is to win, you might actually get away with it for a little bit of time, but generally, I'm an advocate for leaning into something, but not forcing. So no, just because Silver Quill has the highest win rate for now. Actually, I don't know if it still does. Doesn't mean that I'm trying to do that every draft.
Yeah, we just anecdotally we had a member in our Discord who was kind of, this is something we saw a lot more with the bot drafts when we didn't have in-person drafts, but you could kind of force different archetypes because the bots didn't prioritize good cards in those archetypes. And we saw that kind of happen with Silverquill recently, where you could kind of force pretty solid Silverquill decks repeatedly. And we had a listener in the Discord string a couple of trophies together with Silverquill, and I was like, well, they may have adjusted the bots because I just went like 1-3 with a couple of Silverquill decks. Yeah, so
I think for at least a little while, I think Rakdos was actually the color pair that technically had the highest win rate on the color performance page. And that data only updates once a day. So even if we had people going in and forcing it, it would take a little while for you to course correct to something that has a better performance than forcing Rakdos every time.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I didn't know that.
So now just
I think it was a sample size of, I think it was a sample size of 1 or 2 drafts.
Yeah,
I was going to say that I would expect a small sample size with an absurdly high win rate or something like that. But just wanted to flip it back to you. Are there any other kind of irksome misuses of data that you frequently come across? Anything you've been dying to get up on a soapbox and scream out to the world like you're using it wrong?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I have noticed at some points is people just misinterpreting what the data means. And so sometimes that was a matter of telling people, hey, scroll down to the bottom of the page and read the FAQ. More recently, there were some things that came up where it was not actually clear from the FAQ. And so I built out a page that gives more clear definitions for everything that's going on. But yeah, I think that's sort of the best that I can do is try to point people towards understanding what's there. Yeah, I don't have the bandwidth to pay attention to every little thing that people are trying to assert from the data. But yeah, definitely this card has higher win rate, so you should pick it or you should include it in your deck. Is the most common one that I think makes me and a lot of other people off.
Yeah, and that's a great mention there too to the listeners. If you have come across data on 17Lands that you just don't really know what the terms mean or things like that, check out the FAQ because that's huge. Very, very good explanation. And then, yeah, the new pages you mentioned would have bigger or more descriptions there. So if you have any questions about that kind of stuff, check the FAQ out or just Google the different terms because that can be a big deal when it comes to actually understanding what the data that's represented there is talking about. So when looking at the card ratings page on 17Lands, the chart that shows up there can be a bit daunting. There's a lot of different points, a lot of different information there. There are even like multiple different versions of win rates. You have things like card in hand win rates and win rate when drawn or things like that. So can you break down the different win rate columns, what they mean about a given card? And Sirkovitz also has a very, very awesome article on this on the site too. So listeners, if you're interested in getting more details on this sort of thing, definitely check out that article. We'll link that in the episode description.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely recommend checking out his article there. Provides a lot of color on why it's important to pay attention to the different numbers here and what the implications of them can have. But yeah, so I pulled up the site here. I don't have them necessarily all in my head, but yeah, so the first one and the one that we had for a long time was the games played win rate. And so perhaps should have chosen a different name for this because I think it's easy to misinterpret. But this one is the number of games where it's in your deck. So not necessarily cast, because I think that's where the confusion comes from of I'm playing this card, I'm casting it is often what people mean. But that's the win rate when the card is in your deck, regardless of whether you drew it or not. The next one we have here is the opening hand win rate. So this is the win rate for the 4 cards when they are in the hand, the last hand that you've kept. So if you draw a 7-card hand, mulligan, and then put 1 back, it's going to be those 6 cards that you have that you start turn 1 with. The next one we have here is games drawn win rate. So this one is looking at cards that got into your hand sometime after your opening hand. So it wasn't part of your, it was their turn one or later. Then we have games in hand win rate. So that's basically just a combination of the opening hand and the games drawn. So for any card that was in your hand at any point during the game, that's included in there. Then we have games not drawn. So this is like it suggests anything where the card was in your deck, but it was not in your hand at any point during the game. And the last one that we have here is this one isn't really a win rate, but a metric that we've put here of improvement when drawn, which is the difference between the games in hand win rate and the games not drawn win rate. And the thinking behind that is basically the games not drawn win rate gives you a rough sense of the win rate of the deck sort of overall. Like even if I have a super powerful card, just how the archetype performs when it's not drawn gives you sort of a baseline of how much does this card add to that deck. So that can potentially be a little better when you're looking once you're more solidified in a deck to understand what's going to be better for you.
Awesome. And how does working something like lessons in factor into these sort of win rates? Do you count those as if I learn a specific lesson out of my sideboard, does that count as having drawn that card? Walk us through factoring something like that in. I know it's kind of specific to Strixhaven at this point, but
yeah, so that's something that's not handled super well here in that there's it's not going to be an apples to apples comparison against cards that are in your main deck because it's not going to show up in your games played win rate. The only place it'll show up are the games drawn and games in hand. And so with a lesson, because most of the time when you grab that out of your sideboard, because that's the card that's going to fit the situation that you need, or at least the best of those options, and they're going to have inflated win rates there. So there's probably other stuff that we could do, but I think one of the things that I try to do here is keep things generic and evergreen when possible. And so something that we could add and might provide some value in other sets, like there are cards. I mean, a wish board is a term for a reason. There are occasional things that you can do to pull cards out of the sideboard, but we haven't added anything like that to this page. It is also starting to get pretty messy. There are a lot of columns here and hard to interpret, so going to need to break this up at some point if we add any more metrics to it.
That's fair. Yeah, we saw a lot of talk about cards like Expected Anatomy having like very, very high win rates in a lot of the different columns, and or I suppose it would mostly be cards drawn and or games when drawn and games in hand, as you mentioned. But a lot of discourse has been around cards like that, where with the lessons you probably are just casting the one that you need the most, and in most cases, if you're behind, that's going to help you win, and if you're ahead, that's going to help you win. So those as you said might be a little inflated. So I don't know. That sounds like a little bit of a minefield to work through as far as actually parsing out the data that's relevant there, but was curious to get your take on it.
Yeah, and it was actually interesting at the start of the format, like what we do in generating these statistics. There's some data quality that goes in there, and one of the checks that I had in place was if you draw a card that we don't think is in your deck, because the logs that we get from Arena don't necessarily link them together as well as we would hope. Initially, we thought that was a data quality issue, and so we would just throw those out and not include them in these statistics. But obviously, Lesson's going to throw that for a wrench, because there you're actively pulling a card out of your sideboard that isn't in your main deck. And so when we thought it was something that you can't cast, it was causing things to blow up and us to throw out a lot more data than we should have. So I had to go and update that logic a bit.
I think I should take this moment to apologize for the one time that I accidentally main decked a Mercurial Transformation and then won a bunch of games with it before realizing that I had main decked it. I think I may have messed with some data there.
I know plenty of people who move things into their main deck to be able to take a screenshot and share, and then forget to move them out, and plenty of people like that.
Yeah. So looking at this big table of data, one way that I have tried to use this effectively, we've given some examples of what not to do. I think it's about time we do the other end of the spectrum, right? Is just being very specific and literal, rather than kind of offer these hyperbolic. For example, if I sort by, say, win rate when main decked, Killian Ink Duelist comes to the top. So rather than say something along the lines of Killian Ink Duelist is the best pack one pick one in the set because it has the highest win rate when main decked, I would say instead, well, Killian Ink Duelist has the highest win rate when main decked. So it's probably a good early pick. Does this necessarily mean that it is better than X, Y, or Z? Things with other comparable win rates in other areas? Maybe it's a pack one pick one, and you've got a Magma Opus and a Killian in the same pack. Then you're like scratching your head, like, do I just take the higher win percentage? I think it's good to look at exactly what the data has told us, and everything else that comes from there, I guess, is the human interpretation side of things. But I think it starts to get muddy when we start saying that the data is saying things that it's not actually saying. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And to sort of build on that, like looking, I pulled this up and sort of, and one of the things that we can see with this specific example is Killian, I think right now has 68,000 games played with a 59.1% win rate. But if we look at Professor of Symbology, which isn't uncommon, so you expect it's been seen in the same number of packs. It's got a slightly lower games played win rate, 58.3%, but it's got 87,000 games played. And so what we can learn from that is that it's got a much higher chance of making your deck because obviously it fits into more decks than a two-color card would. So yeah, sort of looking at what's there and being understanding some tangential pieces of information can help as well.
Yeah, and actually, that example that Ben just mentioned, and Rob, you mentioned an example earlier as well, kind of when you were breaking down the different win rate columns. Aggregating data can be huge as well, and it paints a much bigger picture than just taking a specific subset of data and saying, like, I'm going to apply this to situation X. In this case, when you're looking at the games played, the actual number of times the card has been played or the number of times it's been drafted or whatever, and the win rate when played, you can kind of paint a more interesting picture. Like you said, Professor Symbology fits more decks. The decks that Killian works well in might just be like, he might just work well in a specific deck, and those decks are really good. But can you really play him in too many other decks? I don't know. That data doesn't necessarily suggest that. So definitely good to take a lot of these different data points and different subsets of data and kind of put them together to get a more holistic picture of what's going on.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question. This isn't something that I noticed before, but addressing the games not drawn win rate, what's kind of like a real world takeaway from this information? So, sorting by this, I see Silverquill Apprentice, Silverquill Silencer, Shadewing Laureate, Spiteful Squad, Owlin Shield Mage. These are all towards the top. This is a trend, right? We're clearly seeing a bunch of Silverquill cards. What does this mean?
Yeah. So one of the things that should jump out, like you said, is that these are all white-black cards, and so they're almost only going to be played in Silverquill decks. And so I bet if we go look, their games not drawn win rate of 59, 58-ish%, probably pretty closely mimics the overall win rate of Silverquill. And so, yeah, because these cards are only going in those decks, but that's what we're going to see here. I can't remember who it was or what the specific card is. This is probably going to be a terrible anecdote. But back in the last set, or one of the recent sets, someone noticed that one of the cards that had the highest games not drawn win rate for a white deck or for of the white commons was some enchantment. And basically their interpretation from it was draft your decks like you want to play this enchantment, but don't actually put it in your deck. So basically the lesson there was you want creatures that are going to do better by being equipped or enchanted, but you don't like the specific equipment or enchantment isn't necessarily going to be the right one for your deck.
Interesting. So as we kind of start to wind down here, there's a few more tools on 17 Lands that I don't think get as much love. And some of those that I wanted to delve into real quick, just to kind of give the listener just some more options of things they can do to use the site. So the card evaluation metagame is one that I don't see discussed too often. What are your thoughts on this one? Do you want to kind of come out in defense of it? Give more people a reason to use it?
Yeah, I love this, and I enjoyed building this and actually seeing what came out of this. So what this does is it plots the average last seen at, so one of the draft statistics of where you're seeing the card in the pack for all of the cards in a given group over time. So we can see how the communities, like the overall Magic communities, evaluation of cards have changed and the overall rankings of them and whatnot. And so I think it's pretty interesting to look at, like, you can sort of guess or identify is there a limited resources effect when they mention these certain cards are overperforming. Do you see them jump in here because so many people are listening to it? Or if a specific card is getting hype, like Burying Books, for example, in this set, you can sort of track its rise over time as people go from it being the third or fourth best to the second to the first, and use that to sort of, hey, okay, I know I was getting extra value from Burying Books super high in my pick order early on, but now it looks like everyone has caught up, and so maybe I should lean out of blue a little bit more. Yeah, have you been able to get any information from it?
I'd say just in big picture. I've noticed that sometimes they stay kind of static. For example, I have up right now all commons of all colors. And I know that heated debate has kind of always remained up at the top, with environmental sciences now at the top, but having climbed a bit since the beginning. I think this is something that I want to take a closer look at the next set. Jumping in now, I almost feel like I missed the boat. Obviously, I can go back and look and see how it's evolved, but I think I guess the next set that this would be really useful for would be the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set coming out. I think I'm gonna pay more attention to this tab when from the beginning and kind of use this to evaluate my own card evaluation skills. To kind of see if I am keeping up properly, or if my I guess my card evaluation sixth sense is accurate. I'm a little too biased as we're already this far into this set now, but now that I know more about, like, I to be honest, I don't even know I could do all these different sorting, and you can sort by date too, which is really cool. I'd say this is a feature that I'm excited to use more.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how long it takes. Like, one of the things that I was worried about with 17 Lands kind of growing in popularity is people are going to use the data and converge on things faster, and limited sets are going to stale even faster. But from this, you can see it takes weeks for people to really settle on card evaluation. And like you said, like, environmental science just like today even reached heated debate on this chart, and I think that's something that a lot of content creators have been saying. This is the best common to pack one, pick one. since very early on. So it takes a while for people to adjust to that, and we can see that here. You can even like sort of overall picture when you're looking at this, you can see that when people rare draft a lot at the beginning. So all of the commons will be pretty deflated in their value, and the rares will be higher. And as people fill out their collections, the rares sort of settle out a little lower, but a lot of the commons start to jump up. So a lot of interesting information you can glean from looking at this.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I like to see as well the way that people's some of the more vocal individuals in the community, say on Twitter, kind of get ahead of the curve, so to speak, where they, you can see just when somebody like Sam Black makes a comment about a card being really good and people undervaluing that card, and you can kind of use this to track, like, oh, okay, it took half a week or so, or it took a week, but people finally caught on to what he was talking about. And it's interesting to me to just see how influential certain creators are, and who's listening and when and all that kind of stuff. So very cool to see the sort of time tracking aspect of that as well.
For sure.
So we've got one more question here for related to Strixhaven specifically. We've been obviously playing a ton of it and really having a great time. So we'd like to know, just from you specifically, what's the most significant or interesting thing about Strixhaven that you've learned thanks to 17Lands data?
I think the thing that I jump to is what everyone's been focused on, which is lessons. I mean, we knew that lessons and learning were good pretty early on. I don't know that necessarily everyone understood before this set came out, but as soon as people started playing with it, it was apparent. But yeah, as we look at the data, and I think Circovitz has a good post about this on Twitter, just having access to 4 or 5 or 6 learn cards and a similar number of lessons and diversity of lessons results in a huge improvement in your win rate. And so, yeah, it's cool to be able to see that see that reflect itself in the data, and especially comparing that to like the modal double face cards that we had seen. And what was that?
They came out first as Zendikar Rising, and then Valheim and Strixhaven,
so comparing that to the modal double face cards in Zendikar Rising, where they got a lot of hype, and even people thought they were doing really well with them early on. They weren't necessarily doing all that well for the community as a whole, and so interesting to be able to see and compare those headline mechanics across a couple of recent sets.
Yeah, I would be interested to like go back and look at overall win rates, and I know it's kind of hard to compare cards from completely different formats, but I'd be interested to see how, like, in general, the modal double face cards that were creatures on one side and lands on another across the board compared to ones that are maybe creatures on both sides or creatures and equipment or things like that, because that was like the big hype with those at first, was that you get to play lands for extra lands for free, or you can cut lands and all that kind of thing. So I'd be curious to see how they fall out in the different formats now that they've changed a little bit. But
for sure.
At least, what's next for you? What's next for 17Lands? You mentioned earlier that you have this draft simulator in the works. Anything else? What's big and exciting?
Yeah, I mean, there's sorts of stuff that we're kind of tinkering with and thinking about. I'm excited to add more features to the simulated drafts. We've got some quality of life improvements that are coming very soon to the draft viewer. And I think sort of long term, what I'm interested in focusing on is there sort of general advice that we can be giving our users? If someone has played done dozens of drafts in a format, can we start to give them advice of, hey, you're taking too many mulligans, or you often wind up with too many lands in your deck compared to people who have a better overall win rate than you seem to have, or hey, you forced this deck more than or this color pair than you probably should. I'd love to be able to get that sort of advice to people. We don't have anything in the near-term development that's going to enable that, but especially as we get more data, that's going to be more feasible for us.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that would be huge. That'd be really, really cool to see. Would just picking your brain a little bit, would you see that in terms of an overlay or just somewhere on the site within like my user settings? I could see, hey, like general suggestions for my user, or do you see yourself developing an overlay for Arena anytime soon?
It's not something that's on our roadmap. It's probably more likely, just given my background and abilities, easier to put on the site, but not to rule out an overlay at some point in the future.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rob, for joining us. Really, really enjoyed picking your brain here about some of the data and different aspects of 17Lands. Anything you want to plug? Give you kind of the floor is yours. Talk about anything that you want to promote or plug or anything like that before we do our final wrap up here.
You have a website, right? I've heard.
Yes, and yeah, so you can certainly visit us at 17lands.com. Follow us on Twitter at 17lands. But I would definitely encourage people, if you're interested in, especially if you're interested in doing data analysis, whether or not you have a background in it, come join our Discord. It's linked on the contacts page for our site. We've got a lot of great people in there who are discussing the kind of public data dumps that we've done. I guess we didn't talk about that actually on the podcast, but not only do we have the sort of aggregations that we think are most useful to people on the site, but I've also been putting some dumps of the raw data of like one row per game that we have. So hundreds of thousands of data points available for you to analyze. And if you're interested in poking around at that sort of thing, or learning how to poke around at that sort of thing, come join our Discord, and get a lot of people who are interested in helping out with that.
Awesome. It's also a great place to go if you're having any issues with the software. The whole entire Discord there is very, very helpful. So if you have tried 17Lands and couldn't quite get it working or something like that, I mean, out of the box, it's quite user friendly, but if you did have any issues, that Discord is definitely a great place to go. We'll link all of those things in the episode description as well. All right. And of course, if you're interested or you haven't been yet, jump into our Discord. The link to that is also in the episode description. We'll have different things, and Rob's in there as well at the moment. Not sure if he's sticking around or not, but catch him while he's there, I suppose. Otherwise, check out the 17Lands Discord for sure. And if you're interested in supporting us or 17Lands, check out both of our Patreons. Definitely huge help there to be able to support either of the two or both or whatever that may be. And at the very least, if you can't support directly monetarily, spread the word, get people using 17Lands, get people listening to the podcast. It helps tremendously. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so on Twitter. You can find me at RannickAlfredian, Ben at BetaFish1, and Rob there at 17Lands. And you can reach the podcast directly at DraftChaffPod on Twitter as well, and email us at draftchaffpod@gmail.com. That does it for us, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
So we have a little bit of a sign off. This is the part of the show where if I feel like I haven't made enough of a fool of myself, like during the typical episode, I have just a few extra minutes to really just drive the point home. But today, I wanted to ask a question I'm not sure you've been asked yet. What is your handle? What is ViralMisnomer?
Not a great story on this. I think it was my Xbox Live handle back in the day, and I think it was something that was mostly auto-generated from Microsoft. So no real story behind that. I guess speaking of naming things, though, fun fact: one of the names that I considered for 17Lands was actually Draft Chaff.
Wow.
My wife talked me out of it, but it was one of the. I was brainstorming for a few days on what to call it, and eventually settled on 17Lands. But Draft Chaff was something I was considering.
That's
wow,
awesome.
that's amazing.
I won't go. I think, Ben, will save the details on how we came up with Draft Chaff for our name for the anniversary episode, where we're going to do a little bit more of a historical look at the show. But thank your wife for us that the name was available.
Oh, yeah. You would have heard from our very expensive lawyers that we definitely have. But Zach, how did you get your handle name?
So Vranik is a name that I thought I made up. Turns out it's actually a character in Baldur's Gate, but I hadn't played Baldur's Gate when I thought I made the name up. So I guess I made it up for myself, but it was not unique to the world. And Galfridian is the last name of a family from Star Wars extended lore in the New Republic era. There's a whole story arc surrounding a kid named Finn Galfridian, and for some reason I really like the name, so I just kind of smashed the two together.
Good name.
Thanks.
Solid. Mine, I guess the quick bit, my last name is Fisher, Beta Fish. I mean, this kind of started as like my secondary account. I would use like Twitter and other things. It was like my secondary Twitter that I did a lot of like shit posting on. So it was like Beta Fish, like my secondary thing. But to this day, I'm not entirely sure how I should pronounce it. Because beta implies it's like my secondary, like not my alpha account, but my beta account. But also, it's not how you pronounce beta fish. Like the fish, I believe, is pronounced beta, right?
I've always pronounced
I do not know.
I've always pronounced it beta, but I'm pretty positive it's spelled with two T's, so it should be pronounced beta. I don't know. I'm not a linguist.
What if you come up with a third pronunciation?
Ooh,
Beta.
beta fish.
There you go.